Well, we might as well start. And are we getting an echo on this? Oh, okay. Well, hello, my name is Bill Wong, and I'm with the Mercer County Science and Engineering Fair. I'm also the editor of electronic design and senior content director with Endeavor's Design and Engineering Group. And today we're going to be talking about STEM competitions. There's a lot of interest, obviously, in STEM, and one of the essentially outcomes is often trying to get people to go on to college and earn a STEM-related degree. But along the way, hopefully they are able to keep their interest and show off what they have been learning at STEM competitions. Let's see if we can get this thing going. All right, there we go. Okay, so I was going to run through a couple of STEM competitions that are out there in case you haven't been aware of them. There are quite a few, but they're all of different types. I'll be talking about some of that a little bit later. They range from middle school to high school to college competitions. The one that I work with at the Mercer Science and Engineering Club, we're actually having our competition next week. And we're related to the Regeneron International Science and Engineering Fair, which is actually one of the largest competitions out there. And also the Thermo Fisher Scientific Junior Innovation Challenge. Thermo Fisher took that over just this year. And what happens is for a lot of local competitions like ours, or regional ones, is that the winners of those competitions move on. There are a lot of other competitions out there where students can participate directly, for example, JSHS, Science Olympiad, and so on. And then there are specialized ones that are looking at certain aspects. For example, there's the Team America Rocketry Challenge. Obviously, it's going to be dealing with rocketry. Robot competitions are another one that are extremely popular. One of the biggest ones is the First Robotics competition. They start off with Legos. There is a First Lego League, and it's typically targeted at middle schools where people are just learning to deal with robots, oftentimes programming in a graphical language and so on. The higher end tech competition is where they're actually building much larger robots. And then if you move up to the first team robotics competition, that's where they're actually dealing with teams of people. And that's the interesting thing about STEM challenges in general. They're usually either individually oriented or team oriented. Very rarely, ISEF, for example, actually combines the two. But there are different dynamics and different purposes for each one. And for those people that are involved in them, they should not just focus on one competition, but take a look at some of the other ones because they're often complementary. And as you can see, there are a whole bunch of robotics competitions out there. They even move up into the very high end. For example, the Hoover Games is actually a large drone. I probably should have brought in a picture of it. But there you're typically seeing a team that is trying to go after a, let's see, did my video disappear? Yeah, my video disappeared again. Let's try this again. There we go. So anyway, with Hoover Games, it's kind of interesting in terms of the competition. For something like Lego League, they have particular tasks that are going to be performed. So it's very clear as to what somebody is going to be designing their particular robot to do. And likewise, in terms of competing against each other, they're oftentimes trying to reach the same goal. With something like the First Robotics competition, you actually have two teams competing against each other. With something like Hoover Games, you're actually trying to prepare a design or a methodology or whatnot that you're going to be presenting to the judges. And then in that case, the judges have to compare each of the teams that are presenting their details to, and it becomes much more difficult because it is oftentimes up to the judges to decide what's more important, how well people are actually meeting that competition. And this crazy video keeps dropping in and out. Okay. For those people that are playing with software, you might not know it, but there are literally dozens of software competitions out there. Everything from Google coding to people working with something like Spark and Ada, which is an advanced programming language that people can use. And programming competitions are, again, of the same type, where you're trying to potentially come up with a particular algorithm within a certain time frame, or it may be that you're trying to come up with something to do a particular task, and then the sets of judges are going to have to compare the results from each of those and figure out who's going to be getting what particular awards. Because in general, those competitions are about rating the results and trying to indicate to the participants how well they perform their particular tasks. Okay. There are also a number of environmental-oriented competitions. They can be engineering-oriented. They can be in terms of process. They could be in terms of research. The Stockholm Water Prize is actually one that's associated with the International Science and Engineering Fair as well. And some of these competitions and awards can be quite significant. In fact, I think for the Stockholm Water Prize, they actually get a trip to Stockholm. So, let's see. Now, so mention some of the more advanced competitions. One of the advantages of some of the other competitions I mentioned were that they're relatively inexpensive to get involved with, and it can essentially be driven by the students that are trying to present their materials. Some of these, on the other hand, are much more expensive in terms of putting things together. For example, the India Autonomous Challenge is really only associated with colleges, and a very select set of colleges, because they are getting essentially an Indianapolis class car that they're turning into a remote control platform. The teams are numbered in, not the teams, but the team members are often numbered in the 20s or 30s. They actually have to do fundraising, do all sorts of other things, in addition to making a car that's actually going to be running around a track at over 170 miles an hour without crashing into everybody else. Likewise, BattleBots is actually more of a commercial concern. You can watch it on cable TV. You have a bunch of robots that are essentially competing against each other, like First Robotics, except for the fact that they're trying to destroy each other. Interesting. It's remote controlled pieces. They're not really, I say, STEM in the same sense of people trying to learn things, other than how to build a very rugged robot. Likewise, the cost for those devices range on the order of $10,000 to $50,000. So it can be quite expensive to actually participate. So the number of people that are actually participating is relatively low, although it is fun to watch. Okay. Okay. Now I'll get to the crux of what I wanted to do. As I mentioned, there are a lot of competitions out there, and the feedback that the students are going to be getting is significant. It's obvious that when they're doing these things within schools and they have their teachers and their parents and whatnot giving them feedback, that's very positive. But seeing other competitions out there, sports competitions and things like that, they can see the recognition that their peers and are being able to give them as well. So having a STEM competition actually encourages people to do more robust research and so on. Now, the challenge is, from the student's point of view, is normally, until they've gotten well into their STEM education, they can't know the procedures that they're going to want to do. They don't necessarily have the background. They're going to be learning along the way. And that requires mentors, teachers, support from peers. And that's actually a very heavy lift. You know, if anybody wants to talk about STEM competitions, they have to talk about STEM education. And STEM education is not necessarily easy. It is something that people are talking about a lot more. The schools themselves have curriculum that are built around it. But in terms of whether STEM education is succeeding and whether they're potentially helping students also participate in STEM competitions, that's a whole nother discussion, because it's not something that simply because a student is interested in science or engineering, that they're automatically going to be able to do a project and participate in one of these competitions. Another part is cost. Now, a lot of the competitions like the science and engineering fair that we run, the cost can be relatively low, especially for middle school, for example. They're oftentimes doing projects that are based on materials that you find at home, at school, and things of that nature. So getting them to do something is relatively easy. You start moving into the robotics competitions, obviously you need a robot, unless you're doing a virtual competition, which is actually another thing that's happening. But if you're having a physical device, it's going to cost you some money. In addition, those devices are not necessarily the only piece that you have to invest in. You may have to have tools, additional training, come on you guys, and so on. And those things additionally cost money. The other challenge with an ASDF is a note that I put in there and didn't finish. But anyway, one of the other challenges with STEM competitions is the cycle time. You start looking at sports competitions, you will see them essentially competing once a week, every other day, once a month. With STEM competitions, because of the amount of work that's involved, the cycle time is often much longer. It may be in months, it may be once a year. That makes it much more challenging to keep the participants focused, as well as what they're going to wind up doing. And what we're trying to encourage in terms of STEM competitions is people repeatedly participating in these, because they can essentially increase their knowledge and increase what they're doing and actually find things that are going to be much more interesting, which is actually what we're trying to do with these various competitions. Now, the other part is the competitions don't necessarily run themselves. Now, most of these competitions that I had mentioned at the beginning were run essentially by volunteers. They're oftentimes sponsored, and trying to get those things up and running can be a challenge. It takes a team to actually do that. Getting the teachers and mentors involved with it is also a challenge, because effectively the students may be interested in competing in a particular competition, but A, they have to know about it, B, they have to sign up for it, and then they have to take their particular project and present it in some fashion, or essentially compete against other teams. There's a cost to this. We talked before about the cost of actually creating devices and participating in generating your projects, but competing in the competitions also costs money, and it can be significant. For those that are affiliated, for example, we're affiliated with ICEF, so to send our winners in our competition to the international fair costs money, because we actually send them on an all expense paid trip. Other competitions, it varies. First Robotics, for example, also essentially sends their teams to those competitions. And again, cycle time is another challenge as to how often you're going to be doing these things. It would be great if we can do these competitions on a much more tight time frame, doing it, say, once or twice a year, but doing it once a year at this point for a lot of these competitions is what's involved, because the preparation required between each of the competitions is significant. Students need time, for example, to run experiments, build robots, and so on. And it's not something that you can do in an afternoon. Okay. Now, this is directed more at those people that are interested in STEM education. And running a competition takes a lot of people. Our group, the Mercer Science and Engineering Club, essentially has to manage all the projects and signups and so on. In addition to that, there are a lot of judges involved, and coordinating those is a challenge. It's not as if we have a large number of people that are interested in doing this, or oftentimes they're interested, but they don't even know about it. Trying to get them in and involved at a particular time is not necessarily an easy task. And you want to get as many people involved because the students are always coming up with projects that'll blow your mind. And if you don't have judges that understand what they're trying to build, they can't judge those projects appropriately. And likewise, they can't necessarily give the students the appropriate feedback that they really deserve. And what you'll find is, from the students' perspective, what they learn in these competitions is not just what they did to build their project or to get into compete against another team, but learning to deal with all the adults that are going to be involved in the competition, learning to take the advice that they're going to be getting and tracking down so that they can improve their learning skills and their projects the next time around. What you'll find is, and this is kind of interesting, because we run our fair and we're affiliated with ICEF, what happens is we wind up sending our top 2 winners to the international fair. Odds are, if those students participate in the next year, they're probably going to be winning again, not just because they won the first time and they had a very good project. That's part of what's involved. But because when they were involved with this other competition, they're now talking to a different group of judges and getting different kinds of feedback, and they're learning how to present their projects and essentially learning a lot of other facts other than just what they did in terms of the STEM project itself. Okay. One thing I wanted to mention at the bottom, oftentimes we have as many judges as we have competitors. And that's because we want to give as much feedback to the students as possible. It's always a challenge when you want to get them together, because again, we were talking about how the cycle time, if you're going to be doing it once a year, all you're doing is getting feedback at that one point in time. If you can get feedback from multiple people, you're going to have a much better chance of understanding what you should be doing the next year. And with that, I'll open it up to questions, and I can answer questions both about the competitions as well as the management of the fair and things of that nature. So I'm not sure if I can get any of the remote people to ask questions, but if you throw it into the chat, I can probably see that as well. So anybody here have any comments, questions? Okay. Well, with that, I will wrap it up. Thank you very much.